November 1758. The 7 Years' War rages across North America. The British Empire controls the seas, but the frontier belongs to no one. A French garrison holds Fort Carillon in the frozen wilderness, and one Scottish officer is about to lead 500 men into hell. His name was Major James Forbes. At 42 years old, he'd survived 3 wars, but this mission was different. He wasn't here to conquer, he was here to survive. The British Army had ordered Forbes to march his regiment north through territory controlled by the French and their Native American allies. The distance, 80 miles. The temperature, minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Forbes was given a choice: wait for spring when reinforcements would arrive, or march now. He chose to march. His officers thought he was insane. We march at dawn. The French expect reinforcements in December. We strike before they arrive. This is our only advantage. That night, Forbes briefed his officers on the march route. They would move through dense forest, avoiding the main roads where French scouts patrolled. It was a gamble. If they were discovered, they had 500 men, supplies for 2 weeks. The distance to Fort Carillon would take 3 weeks to traverse. Someone was going to starve. November 15th, 1758. Before dawn, 500 British soldiers formed ranks in the darkness. They didn't know it yet, but many of them would never return. Move out. Silence. Any man who breaks ranks is left behind. Understood? The first day was brutal. The regiment marched 12 miles through unbroken snow. By nightfall, a soldier from Scotland had collapsed from exposure. He was left behind. By the third day, the food supplies were already critically low. Forbes had miscalculated the consumption rate. Soldiers were eating half rations. Then, on the 4th day, a French patrol was spotted. The regiment froze. If they were seen, the entire march was compromised. The French patrol never saw them. They passed within 200 yards of the entire regiment. But Forbes knew the French now knew a British force was in the region. Time had become their enemy. Forbes increased the pace. They marched 15 hours a day. Men began to collapse from exhaustion. Some soldiers were now carrying injured comrades while barely able to stand themselves. By day 8, the regiment had marched 45 miles. They were approaching French territory. Fort Carillon was only 35 miles away, but they were running on empty. Listen to me. Fort Carillon is 2 days' march. 2 days. I know you're suffering. I know you're starving. But we push through and we take that fort, or we freeze to death out here for nothing. That night, 3 soldiers abandoned the regiment. They simply walked away into the darkness, choosing to take their chances alone rather than continue. Forbes didn't pursue them. He understood. Some men break. He focused on the ones who remained. Day 8. The regiment awoke to find 2 more soldiers had died in the night, frozen solid. They had to leave them behind. But something had changed. The suffering had united them. The remaining 495 soldiers were no longer individuals. They had become one thing, an instrument of will. That afternoon, they spotted smoke on the horizon. Fort Carillon. They were close. Too close. Forbes called a halt. The regiment was 2 miles from the fort. The French would have sentries. If they advanced directly, it would be a massacre. We don't attack the fort. We can't. We're too weak. We siege it. We cut off their supply lines. We make them come to us. It was a brilliant strategy. The fort had 800 soldiers inside, well fed and armed. Forbes had 495 starving men. But Forbes knew something the French didn't. He knew how to win without fighting. He established a siege. The French couldn't leave the fort. Every supply convoy would be intercepted. Every messenger would be captured. It was patience against desperation. 3 days passed. The fort commander, Colonel Chevalier de Saint Laurent, realized he was trapped. He had a choice: fight or surrender. Saint Laurent was a professional. He understood the mathematics of warfare. 800 men could hold a fort, but 800 men with no supplies facing 500 determined enemies couldn't. He sent a messenger. Forbes received him under a white flag. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. Tell Colonel Chevalier de Saint Laurent he has until sunset. If he surrenders the fort, his men march with honor, weapons laid down, but their lives spared. The messenger returned to the fort. Saint Laurent had one choice: lose his men in a futile defense, or preserve them for future battles. As the sun touched the western horizon, the gates of Fort Carillon opened. 800 French soldiers marched out, their weapons stacked, their colors furled. Forbes had won a fort with 495 starving soldiers against 800 well-supplied defenders without firing a single shot. It was one of the greatest strategic victories of the war. But Forbes paid a price. Of the 500 soldiers who marched out of the British camp, only 471 returned. 29 soldiers had died. Dozens more would lose fingers and toes to frostbite. Forbes filed his report to the British command. Mission accomplished. Fort Carillon secured. The garrison eliminated as a threat. What Forbes didn't report was the toll on his men, or the 29 graves dug in the frozen ground outside Fort Carillon, or that some of those soldiers never felt their toes again. Forbes died 2 years later, his body ravaged by disease contracted during that winter march. He never saw the end of the war he'd fought so hard to win. But Fort Carillon remained in British hands for the rest of the war. It became the key strategic position that helped the British defeat France in North America. The soldiers who survived that march never forgot it. They told their children and grandchildren about the winter they followed Forbes through hell itself. Some historians say that winter march was the turning point of the 7 Years' War, not because of tactics or generals, but because 495 starving soldiers refused to break. Major James Forbes proved that war isn't always won with the most soldiers or the most supplies. Sometimes it's won by a man who refuses to accept defeat, even when the odds say he should.